My name is not important right now. What's important is that I'm sitting at my kitchen table, the same table where I've had coffee every morning for 23 years, and I'm finally letting myself feel something I buried for a long time. Relief. Pure, bone-deep relief. Because 11 months ago my son brought his new wife to this house and asked me, very politely, the way people ask when they've already decided the answer, to sign over my financial accounts to a joint trust managed by the two of them. And I smiled and said I'd think about it. I didn't tell him that there was nothing to sign. I didn't tell him that 3 years earlier, after his father's first stroke, I had already moved everything. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually started. Gerald died on a Tuesday in November. 29 years of marriage, and he went quietly in his sleep, the way he always said he wanted to go. No drama, no long goodbyes. Just there one night and gone the next morning. I was 63 years old, and I had no idea who I was without him. We weren't rich. I want to be clear about that. We were comfortable the way people who work hard for 40 years get comfortable. Gerald had been an electrician, then a contractor, then eventually a small business owner. I had worked as a medical office administrator for most of our marriage. Together we'd saved. We'd invested carefully with a financial advisor at our credit union who Gerald had trusted for 20 years. We owned our home outright, a 4-bedroom in Greensboro, North Carolina, the same house we'd moved into when our son Damon was 7 years old. When Gerald died, everything came to me. The house, the investment account, a modest but meaningful life insurance policy, the savings. It wasn't a fortune by anyone's measure, but it was enough. Enough to live on without touching the principal for a long time, if I was careful. Enough that if something happened to me, Damon would be taken care of. I didn't announce any of this. I'm a private person. I always have been. My mother raised me to believe that your finances were your own business, and you didn't lay them out on the table for other people to assess. Even family. Damon knew his father had done well for himself. He knew we owned the house. Beyond that, I don't think he had thought much about the specifics. Why would he? He was 40 years old, living his own life, working as a project manager for a construction firm in Charlotte. We talked every Sunday. He visited for holidays. We had a good relationship. Not a close one maybe, but a steady one. A comfortable one. That changed the spring after his father died. That's when he met Shayla. I'll be honest. My first impression of Shayla was not a bad one. She was attractive and well-dressed. She worked in financial services, mortgage lending, she said, which I remember finding slightly ironic later. She laughed at Damon's jokes and touched his arm when she talked to him and looked at him the way women look at men they've decided to keep. He was lit up around her, happier than I'd seen him since before his father got sick. I wanted to like her. I genuinely did. But there were small things. The kind of things you notice and then tell yourself you're imagining. The first time she came to my house, she walked through it slowly. Not like a guest admiring someone's home, more like someone taking inventory. She paused in the doorway of the study where Gerald had kept his desk and his files and his books. She asked me, casually, how long we'd lived here. I told her 22 years. She nodded and said, "It's a lot of house for one person." I let it go. People say things. The second time she asked me about my retirement. Not in a nosy way, she said. She worked in financial services. She was just used to thinking about these things. I told her I was fine. She smiled and said I should really look into consolidating my accounts. That it would be simpler. Simpler for whom I didn't ask. Damon and Shayla got engaged 8 months after they met. They were married 6 months after that. A small ceremony, beautiful, in a garden venue outside Charlotte. I was happy for my son. I was. But sitting in that folding chair in my pale blue dress, watching him slide a ring onto her finger. I felt something I couldn't quite name. Not dread, exactly. More like caution. The kind of feeling you get when the weather looks fine, but something in the air has shifted. I didn't say anything. What would I have said? The first request came 4 months after the wedding. Damon called on a Sunday, which was normal, but his voice had that particular flatness that meant he'd rehearsed what he was going to say. He started with concern. He said he and Sheila had been talking, and they were worried about me, living alone in a big house, managing everything by myself. What if something happened? What if I had a health event and couldn't reach anyone? Didn't it make sense to have some kind of safety net? I told him I had a safety net. I had my friend Opal, 3 streets over, who checked on me regularly. I had my doctor appointments and my annual physicals. I was in good health. I walked 2 miles every morning. I was 64 years old, not 90. He said he knew that. He said this wasn't about doubting my competence, and then he said it. Sheila had put together a plan, a family trust. Nothing complicated. It would just mean that if anything happened to me, they'd be able to step in immediately without any legal delays. He'd be named co-trustee. It would give them peace of mind. I asked him if Sheila would also be named on this trust. A pause. Yes, he said. As a co-trustee alongside him. Standard practice, apparently. I told him I'd think about it. I thought about it for approximately 30 seconds after I hung up the phone. The answer was no, but I didn't say no. Not yet. I had learned from Gerald that when you don't know the full shape of something, you don't respond to the part you can see. What happened next was gradual. That's the thing about this kind of situation. It doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in pieces, each one small enough to explain away. Sheila started calling me directly. Not often, but regularly. Checking in, she said. Sweet, even. She remembered details. She'd ask about my friend Opal, about my garden, about the book club I'd mentioned once in passing. She was good at making you feel seen. I recognized it because I had worked in a medical office for 20 years, and I knew how people used warmth as a tool. She started referring to my house as a lot to maintain. She sent me articles about over 55 communities. The nice kind, she said. The ones with amenities and social events. She mentioned a woman she knew, around my age, who had sold her house and moved into one of those communities and absolutely loved it. I read the articles. I didn't respond to them. There were visits too, more frequent than before. Damon and Sheila would drive up from Charlotte on a Saturday, and they'd walk through the house together with the particular energy of people who are imagining something. Sheila would comment on the yard. So much work, or the stairs, were they becoming difficult? She never said anything outright. She asked questions that contained conclusions inside them, and Damon, my son. I spent a long time trying to understand what happened to my son. The man I raised knew how to stand up. He'd had a backbone all his life. He'd pushed back against his father when he disagreed, held his own in arguments, built a career without anyone handing him anything. But something about Sheila softened that part of him, or redirected it. Around her he deferred. Not obviously, he would have denied it if you'd said so, but I watched him look to her before he answered questions, adjust his position when she shifted hers, retreat when she pushed. It wasn't weakness exactly. It was like he had decided somewhere along the way that keeping her happy was worth bending himself. I don't entirely blame him for that. Love makes you do things you wouldn't recognize from the outside. But I noticed. The second request came 7 months after the first. This time Damon drove up alone, which was unusual. He sat at this same kitchen table and drank coffee and talked around the subject for about 15 minutes before getting to it. He said Sheila was worried that my estate planning was outdated, that I should at minimum have a durable power of attorney in place. that if I wasn't ready to do the trust, and he understood if I wasn't, no pressure, then at least this. Just to have it ready, he slid a folder across the table. Inside was a power of attorney document, already prepared. Shayla's name was on it, alongside his. I looked at that document for a long time. I thought about my husband, who used to say that paperwork is just intentions made permanent, and you should be very careful which intentions you put your name on. I told Damon I had an attorney. I'd have her look at it. He looked relieved. That was the part that stayed with me. He looked genuinely relieved, the way you look when you've been dreading an argument that didn't come, which meant he had expected resistance, which meant he knew on some level that what he was asking wasn't entirely neutral. He left that folder on my table when he drove back to Charlotte. I put it in a drawer. I called my attorney the next morning. Her name is Patricia. No, wait, I need a different name. Her name is Donna Webb. She'd handled Gerald's estate, and she'd known us for 15 years. I trusted her the way you trust someone who has seen your paperwork and didn't flinch. Donna listened to everything I told her. Then she was quiet for a moment, the way she gets when she's thinking. She said, "Vivian, I need you to understand something. A durable power of attorney is a significant document. If you sign that and something happens to your health, even temporarily, whoever holds it can make financial decisions on your behalf, immediately, without a court." I said I understood. She said, "Has anyone mentioned a conservatorship to you?" I said no. She said, "Okay, I want you to keep that word in mind, because the path you're describing, the trust push, the power of attorney with a daughter-in-law on it, the comments about your house being too much, these are steps that sometimes precede a petition for conservatorship. If someone were to argue that you're no longer capable of managing your own affairs, having signed a power of attorney with them on it would make that easier." I sat in my car in the parking lot of my grocery store for a long time after that call. I want to pause here and say something clearly, because I know how this sounds. I don't know for certain what Shayla's intentions were. I don't know what she said to Damon in private, or what she believed about me, or what she imagined the future looked like. It's possible she genuinely thought she was helping. It's possible she was building something else entirely. I never found out, and I've made peace with that. What I knew, what I had to act on, was the pattern in front of me. After my call with Donna, I spent 2 weeks getting my affairs in order. Not in a panic, methodically, the way Gerald would have done it. My financial accounts had already been moved 3 years earlier, when Gerald had his first stroke. I had restructured everything with Donna's guidance. The investment accounts, the savings, the house, everything was an irrevocable living trust in my name. I was the sole trustee. Damon was named as successor trustee upon my death or incapacity, but incapacity had a very specific legal definition under the terms of the document, requiring 2 independent physicians to certify it. It could not be triggered by a family member's opinion or a durable power of attorney signed under social pressure. Shayla's name was nowhere in any of it. It had never been. I also, in those 2 weeks, had a quiet conversation with my brother Terence in Richmond. I told him what was happening. He was angry, the kind of contained, quiet angry that our family does, and he offered to drive down. I told him not yet. I told him I would call him if I needed him. Then I waited. The visit happened on a Thursday in September. Damon called the night before and said they were coming up to take me to lunch, a nice place, their treat. I said that would be lovely. They arrived at 11. Shayla was dressed carefully, the way she dressed when she wanted to project something. Professional, warm, organized. She had a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. We sat in the living room. Damon was quieter than usual. He kept looking at Shayla. She started with pleasantries. She asked about Opal, about my garden, about whether I'd given any more thought to the community she'd sent me information about. Her voice was soft and steady, and she made eye contact and nodded when I spoke. And if you hadn't been paying attention the whole time, you might have thought it was a normal conversation between a woman and her mother-in-law. Then she opened the portfolio. She said she'd taken the liberty of having a few documents prepared. She knew I had reservations about the trust, and she respected that, but she'd spoken with a financial planner. Her firm had a relationship with him, and he had put together something she thought I'd feel more comfortable with, simpler than what they'd proposed before, just an updated beneficiary structure and a revised power of attorney. There was a man I didn't recognize sitting in my armchair. I looked at him. Shayla said, "This is Mr. Okafor. He's a notary, just to make it official." I looked at my son. Damon did not look at me. He was looking at his hands. There is a particular feeling that comes when you realize the thing you suspected is actually happening. It's not panic. It's almost the opposite. A kind of settling, like when fog clears and you can finally see the shape of the land. I had been prepared for this. I just hadn't known exactly what shape it would take. I looked at Shayla. I looked at the portfolio in her lap, and the notary in my armchair, and my son's hands folded in his lap like he was waiting for something to be over. I said calmly, "Before we go any further, I think you should know that my accounts aren't in my name." Shayla stopped. I said, "The house, the investment accounts, the savings, they've been in a revocable living trust since 2022. My attorney is the trustee of record. Any changes require my written instruction and a waiting period. There's nothing here to sign." The portfolio stayed in her lap, but her hands went still. I said, "I appreciate that you brought Mr. Okafor, but I don't think he's going to have much to do today." Shayla looked at Damon. This was the moment I had been watching for, the moment she looked to him to fix something she hadn't anticipated. And I watched my son's face go through something complicated, surprise, confusion, and then very slowly, something that looked almost like understanding. He said quietly, "Mom, you already took care of it." I said, "I took care of it a long time ago. Your father would have wanted me to." What happened after that was not dramatic, which I think surprised everyone, including me. Shayla closed the portfolio. Mr. Clare. Okafor gathered his things and showed himself out with a politeness that suggested he'd witnessed awkward situations before. Damon sat very still. We did not go to lunch. After the notary left, the three of us sat in my living room for a while. Shayla excused herself to use the restroom, which I think meant she needed a moment to rearrange her thinking. Damon and I sat alone for the first time in a long time. He said, "I didn't know about the trust." I said, "I know you didn't." He said, "She told me it was straightforward, that you'd been putting it off, and you just needed." He stopped. "She made it sound like you needed help." I said, "I know what she made it sound like." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw on his face something I hadn't seen in almost 2 years, embarrassment, and underneath it, something raw. He said, "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't perform forgiveness." I just nodded, because forgiveness is a thing you give over time, not in a moment, and I'm 65 years old, and I have earned the right to take my time with it. When Shayla came back from the restroom, the dynamic in the room had shifted. She could feel it. She was gracious about it. I'll give her that. Said she was glad everything was in order. Said she'd just been worried. Said she hoped I knew it came from a good place. I listened to all of it without arguing. There was nothing to argue about anymore. They drove back to Charlotte that afternoon. In the weeks after, Damon called more. Just to talk, not to ask anything. He came up one Saturday alone, not with Shayla, and we sat on the back porch and he told me some things about his marriage that I won't repeat here. I just listened. I didn't say I told you so, because what kind of mother says that? But I thought it. He was seeing more clearly. That was enough, and now I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened, and I've come to believe that the mistake Shayla made, and maybe this is what I want any woman my age who's listening to understand, the mistake was assuming that age means diminished, that because I was a widow living alone in a big house, I must be confused or overwhelmed or in need of managing. She looked at me and saw a problem to be solved. She didn't consider that I might have seen her coming. I have been taking care of myself and the people I love for 65 years. I was not about to stop. Gerald used to say that the strongest position in any negotiation is the one where you already have what you need. I didn't understand that fully, until the afternoon I watched a notary leave my house with nothing to notarize. The sun was coming through the kitchen window the way it does in late September in North Carolina, that particular gold that doesn't last long. I made myself a cup of coffee. I sat at this table. I felt, for the first time since my husband died, completely steady, not because I had won anything, but because I had protected something that mattered. I had kept faith with the life Gerald and I had built together. I had stood in my own house, on my own ground, and held the line. And I hadn't needed to raise my voice once. My mother used to say that a woman who knows what she has doesn't need to announce it. She just needs to know it. In the quiet, in the private, in the small hours when no one else is watching, I know what I have, and I know what I'm worth. If you're sitting somewhere right now reading this or listening to this, and you recognize something in this story, if someone in your life has been slowly, gently rearranging things around you, asking questions that are really conclusions, expressing concern that feels more like pressure, I want you to hear this. You are not imagining it, and you are not too old to protect yourself. Get a good attorney, one you chose, not one someone brought to your house. Know what you own and how it's titled and what protections are already in place. Don't sign anything because someone made you feel like not signing was unreasonable. Your home, your savings, your life, they are yours, not because you're lucky, because you worked for them, because someone who loved you worked for them alongside you. Don't let anyone be gracious about taking what's yours. I'm going to finish my coffee now. The light is still good, and Opal is coming over at 3, and I have absolutely nothing to worry about. That's not a small thing. That's everything. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that Thursday in September, not in any mystical sense, just the plain, observable kind, the kind where if you trace a line backward from any outcome, you can find the exact decision that made it inevitable. Shayla walked into my house with a notary and a leather portfolio, because every time she had pushed before, nothing had pushed back. Not loudly. I hadn't argued. I hadn't accused her of anything. I had smiled and said I'd think about it, and from where she was standing, that probably looked like a woman who could be moved. That was her read of me. Someone overwhelmed, maybe a little lost, willing to be guided if you were patient enough about it. She was wrong, but I understand why she thought what she thought. Here's what I've come to believe. The people who underestimate you are almost always working from incomplete information. Shayla knew I was a widow. She knew I lived alone. She knew I was past 60 and in a big house and that my son deferred to her in most things. What she didn't know, what I had never given her reason to know, was that I'd been paying attention every single day. That Gerald and I had spent decades making careful decisions together, and that when he got sick we had finished that work with the same care we'd started it with. She filled in the gaps with assumptions. That's not a moral failing. People do it all the time, but it cost her. And Damon, my son, I've had to sit with my own part in that too. I didn't tell him about the trust because I valued my privacy, and that's fair. But there's a version of events where more honesty between us earlier might have interrupted what Shayla was building, before it got to the point of a notary in my living room. I'm not saying I was wrong to protect my own affairs. I'm saying that silence has a shape, and sometimes the people who love you fill it with things you didn't intend. What I want any woman who's been through something like this to understand is this: protecting yourself is not a dramatic act. It doesn't require a confrontation. It doesn't require you to announce what you know or prove what you've figured out. The most powerful thing I did in this entire situation was something I had done 3 years before it happened, quietly, with an attorney, on an ordinary afternoon. That's where the real work was. Not in the living room when the notary showed up. That part was easy because the hard part was already done. Wisdom isn't loudness. It's preparation that looks like stillness. It's knowing, while everyone around you is making assumptions, that you already hold the thing they're reaching for. Donna told me once that the best legal document is the one that makes a dispute impossible before it starts. I think that's true of most things in life, not just law. I earned what I have. Gerald and I built it together, early morning by early morning, year by year, in a life that was mostly ordinary and entirely ours. Nobody walks into that and takes it because they showed up with the right paperwork. Not if you've done your work first. Damon is still my son. We are still finding our way back to each other. It's slower than I'd like and more honest than it used to be, which I think is the right trade. He's seeing his own situation more clearly now, and that's his life to navigate, not mine. As for me, I'm fine. I'm more than fine. I'm 65 years old with good coffee and a trusted friend coming over at 3 and a house that is fully, legally, unambiguously mine. That's not luck. That's what happens when you pay attention, prepare quietly, and refuse to let anyone convince you that needing to think something over is the same as being helpless. It never is.